Okay, so we took a look at the approaches to the policy process in the last segment. So we had the political systems theory, group theory, elite theory, institutionalism, and rational choice theory. In looking at them, we want to take a look at two case studies. First is the case study of campaign finance reform. In 2002, essentially a Republican and a Democrat, John McCain and Russ Feingold, basically took a look at the monetary system of funding public elections here in the United States, and there was a great discontent with the amount of money in the American system. There hadn't been any changes since the Federal Election Campaign Act was passed in 1971 and subsequently revised in 1974. So between 1974 and 2002, really no changes at all to the system. Now, one of the big things that occurred here was that it banned something called soft money. This is the current system as it exists. Hard money is considered that money which you would give directly to an individual candidate, a political action committee, or for that matter, a political party. So in any given election, I can give, in 2017, I can give $2,700 to each candidate in each election. Okay? So say, for example, I supported either Donald Trump or I supported Hillary Clinton in the last presidential election. I could have given that candidate $2,700 in the primary election and an additional $2,700 in the general election. That money goes directly to that candidate. That candidate can then use that for their campaign, whether it's to fly somewhere, whether it's to hold a rally, whether it's to, get hats, lawn signs, whatever the case may be. So I'm limited in the amount that I can give directly to that candidate. The same thing for a political action committee. I can only give them $5,000 per year. And as you see, if you go through the top, on the far right-hand corner at the top, I am basically prohibited from giving any more than $100,700 per year for me. Now, this being America, people found a way around this and found a way to circumvent the law. And certainly they found another way after McCain-Feingold as well. But what was happening in the 1990s was that there was this thing called soft money. So at that point in time, I was limited in the amount I could give to an individual candidate, but I could give unlimited sums of money to political parties. So let's just think about this. I'm limited in the amount of money that I could give to a candidate, but I could give money to the Democratic or the Republican parties for the purposes of party building activities. And one of these things would be registering people to vote, getting out the vote, building the name brand of the Democratic or Republicans, or doing things like building buildings and new facilities that would help get the political parties the ability to be able to, again, build their party brand name. Now, you might understand that if you're given the ability to give unlimited amounts of money, of soft money, to a political party, there might be a way to abuse the system, and sure enough, there was. So what we had, by the time we had campaign finance reform, was about $500 million every election cycle going in soft money to the Democrats and the Republicans. And, essentially it was a way to circumvent the legal system. Democrats and Republicans would run ads, essentially not telling you to vote for a candidate, but showing, the Democratic values or the Republican values, and leaving it up to you to decide that you shouldn't vote for the other candidate, right? Mm-hmm. So what happened in 2002 was McCain and Feingold got together, they banned soft money, and they created a new election system here. Now, inadvertently, they created a much more complex system of campaign finance in the United States, particularly after a number of Supreme Court cases in the last decade. And now we actually have the ability to spend as much money as we want through groups called 527 organizations. And they are essentially what we call independent expenditure organizations. So I can spend as much of my own money as I want in an election cycle, as long as I don't coordinate my campaign with a political party or with an individual running. All right? So let's take a look at how this might be interpreted. Systems theorists would say, okay, let's take a look at that inputs and the outputs. All right? Let's take a look at the demand from the public to end this $500 million in soft money spending. People were not particularly happy with the large amount of money in politics. So how do we focus on that? So systems theory would say this is actually a good thing, right? People wanted to change in the system, and the output from government was campaign finance reform. Democracy worked well. Institutionalists would say, how did this get to be a law? I mean, think about this. We've got a Republican senator and a Democratic senator, McCain and Feingold. How did they actually, successfully work to navigate this through Congress? And thinking about the year 2002, the Democrats controlled the Senate. We had a Republican president, George W. Bush, who really didn't care one way or the other about this bill. It wasn't a priority for him. And then we had a Republican House of Representatives. How did they manipulate the rules to be able to get this through? How did it become law given the fact that we have bicameralism? Group theory would have taken a look at this and said, okay, whenever you have campaign finance law reform, there's going to be a bunch of groups that are jockeying for position to advantage themselves. Who are the groups behind this? Who are the groups pushing this? And how did that affect the outcome? The elite theorists, of course, would go back to their conspiracy theory type things. How did they use this system, those elites, to make this system work better for themselves? Well, one way we could take a look at this is, the systems theorists would be saying, this is great, this is, something that's helping democracy. But in reality, when we take a look at it, what didn't happen here? What didn't happen here was the possibility that we might have had campaigns funded from public sources. What if we took all money out of politics, right? The elite theorists would say, you basically made some kind of symbolic move, right, getting rid of this soft money, but it's 2017, 2018, whatever, and there's still a lot of money in politics. They didn't do anything, right? The people that have money are still the ones that control elections. And then finally, rational choice. How does self-interest play into the specifics of this bill? Part of it was that Republicans, in general, this worked out for them. Traditionally, they had been able to outraise the Democrats up to 2002. Soft money helped the Democratic Party more than it helped the Republican Party. Maybe that's why they went along with this, right? Why did John McCain support this when it's not a traditionally Republican issue? Well, because he wanted to run for election in 2008, right? Wanted to keep himself out there as being a reform type guy. Why did George W. Bush sign the bill? Right? Well, think about his own self-interest. What happens if you've got a bill on your desk that reforms the campaign finance system and you veto it, right? That's not very good optics for a president. So in thinking about this, they would take a look at the self-interest. Let's take a second thing here, and this is the welfare reform from 1996. So what we saw was a Democratic president who ran in 1992 saying that he's going to be a new Democrat, he's going to end welfare as we know it. And you have a Republican Congress in 1994. They worked together to pass welfare reform that ends welfare as an entitlement, right? Now, by that, essentially what it means is that entitlement programs are something that you are eligible for depending on how much money you make or the category of person that you are, right? Up to that point, everybody, people that had certain income levels and so forth were eligible for welfare. This program ended welfare as an entitlement. It set work requirements for people that were getting welfare, and it also set time limits on the amount of years that you could get welfare, right? What it also did was it turned money over to the states in block grants to allow them to be able to innovate and create their own programs, right? And this is very popular with people. It was probably instrumental in getting and Bill Clinton reelected in 1996. So how would we interpret this from the 5 different theories that we have? Systems theory, right? Welfare has never been a very popular program in the United States. I mean, it's not just one program, but the idea of welfare has never been popular. We tend to differentiate, as we'll see later in the semester, between what we call the deserving and undeserving poor, right? People that are down on their luck, people that are elderly, people that are sick. We view them as being the deserving poor. People that don't work for a living, those people are considered to be the undeserving poor. You know, rightly or wrongly, that's the way that we kind of focus in on the poor in the United States. So systems theorists would say, hey, people wanted welfare reform. It was one of the reasons why Bill Clinton got elected. And it was one of the reasons why he got reelected. So if we're thinking in terms of political systems theory, the input was we wanted change, and out of that system we got change. So it did work. Institutionalists would say, hey, how about the federal system? How did that affect things? And one example, or actually 2 examples, would be prior to welfare reform in 1996, 2 states were instrumental in creating kind of a game plan for how to work here. And one was that, you know, Wisconsin and Michigan were given waivers to be able to create what became known as kind of, you know, working for welfare, right? And the idea that you had to have work requirements were things that were actually practiced in the states of Michigan and Wisconsin. Those laboratories of democracy, the states, then were able to transfer what they had experienced to the national level, which became the national policy, right? So federalism made a deep impact on the public policy outcomes that we'd see here, right? Group theory, you know, think about this. Who kind of got the shaft here? Well, it was poor people. Well, think about what we talked about when we talked about group theory. Who mobilized here in order to be able to get this welfare reform? Did anybody speak for the welfare recipients in this process? Elite theory's got an interesting kind of perspective on this. If you think about this, one of the things that, you know, Welfare to Work did was essentially it subsidized jobs that were created for welfare recipients. Right? So think about this. An elite theorist would say this is reform wrapped up in nothing but big government programs that help business. Right? It's welfare for businesses. So not only do we kick people off welfare, but then we subsidize jobs for people working in companies so that companies don't have to pay them an already low minimum wage. This isn't reform. This is just welfare for businesses, right? And somehow they wrapped it up in the idea of reform. And then rational choice would basically say, look, you know, people, you know, welfare is deeply unpopular in the United States. You know, in looking at welfare, politicians only did, regardless of, you know, their beliefs on why people were on welfare, they knew that it would be unpopular to oppose this type of thing, so they just passed this policy. Right? So here are a couple of examples of how we might look at public policy in the United States through these different lenses that are provided to us by Anderson.